Hello everybody, this is Laura Susan Johnson with Period Pieces, and tonight I'm going to be doing a 1950 movie that is actually a 20s period piece called Cheaper by the Dozen. This is not to be confused with a pointless remake done in 2003 starring Steve Martin and Ashton Kutcher and Helen Hunt. No, I'm sorry, Bonnie Hunt. I like Bonnie Hunt, I like Steve Martin, and there's times where I like Ashton Kutcher, but this pointless remake of a 1950 film has absolutely nothing to do with a true story in which a 1950 film was based on. The 1950 film, starring Clifton Webb as Frank Gilbreth Sr., is based on the story of a family headed by a renowned engineer. Today we would call him probably a kinetic engineer. Back then they called him a motion studies specialist, efficiency expert in human movement. He would go from place to place lecturing, doing lecture studies on how to save money or how to save time in industrial settings, in the industrial age, which was, evolving, of course. Doing things in a quicker way, just doing things that would, doing things in half the time. But the movie's not exactly about his studies or his expertise as much as it is about the large family he and his wife Lillian raised. When they married, they decided to have an even dozen children, 6 boys and 6 girls. It sounds kind of weird, but back then it was the 19-teens and 1920s, and it wasn't all that horrific an idea, I suppose, in those days. I did review this movie on the IMDb back in 2008 or 2009, and I think I gave it quite a favorable review back then. Probably either 9 out of 10, somewhere between 8 and 10 stars out of 10. Since then, I still like the movie quite a lot, but some of the morals in the movie regarding women kind of rub me the wrong way, and I'll explain by and by. So, Clifton Webb, he's a lovable old actor who not recently, he died a while back. He died probably decades ago, but because he was old when this movie was made. Matter of fact, his wife Lillian is played by Myrna Loy, and she appears to be noticeably younger than he. Myrna Loy, of course, plays Lillian Gilbreth, and Clifton Webb plays Frank Gilbreth. Clifton Webb came out later in his life as a homosexual, and I guess they made fun of him for that and for the fact that he lived with his mother until he died. And I think he lived with his mother because back in those days, if you were homosexual, it was pretty much frowned upon by society. And this was even, this was at the dawn of the 1950s, when the 1950s are known to be one of the worst decades for homophobic hatred. So it doesn't appear to have harmed his career early in life, but I don't think he came out until late in his life. So it was kind of a sad way of existing in those days. The movie, according to the narrator, who is the oldest daughter, Anne, played by actress Jean Crane, the movie is supposed to focus on the relationship between the father and the mother. But to me, the relationship between the father and the eldest daughter, who narrates the movie, seems to be the focus. In the meantime, the novel, Cheaper by the Dozen, was written by the second eldest daughter, Ernestine Gilbreth Carey, and also Frank Jr., the oldest son. So you kind of have a different different media giving you different viewpoints. As one of the many viewers of this movie, I got more of a father-daughter focus to this movie. The oldest daughter the story begins when she's a sophomore in high school, and she's boy crazy. She's starting to be a little rebellious. It's the days of, it begins in 1921 and it kind of concludes in 1923. So the movie takes place over a little, kind of a 2-year time span. And she's going from a sophomore to a senior in high school. They start out in Rhode Island, and not too soon after the movie begins, they move to Montclair, New Jersey. At first, the kids are upset, but quickly they adjust to their new home in New Jersey, and they make new friends, and they meet hunky new dudes, and I'll go into that in a minute. Ernestine, the second eldest daughter, is played by Barbara Bates, who was a very promising young actress in early Hollywood, 1940s, 1950s Hollywood, but she married some man, and I think he kind of wrecked her career, and she ended her life in suicide. So that was one of the earlier forms of like a James Dean kind of story, where some young hot star in Hollywood ended tragically. Patty Brady plays one of the younger daughters named Martha. There's actually a younger daughter named Lillian Jr., and of course there's a Frank Jr. played by Norman Olstott. And Jimmy Hunt is one of the standouts. He plays Bill, one of the younger sons, and he's really brilliant in this movie. He's one of the most brilliant child actors that I've ever seen, because towards the end of the movie, I don't want to give it away, but he has this brilliant scene where he just cries, and I think I found out in one article somewhere where during one of their first screenings of this movie, the scene was so moving and so heartwarming, or so just tear-jerking, that one of the actual members of the family ran out of the theater crying because it was such an intense scene. Of course, like I said, it's a true story. This man was a very famous kind of an engineer, specialist, expert in movement and efficiency in industrial settings. He and his wife, even though his wife was also world-renowned, or at least nationwide renowned psychologist, they don't really go into her achievements all that much, but she was his right-hand partner and helper in his studies, and she carried on his work after he died. But he is very, they do go into a lot of his work. They do show a lot of his experiments. They show a lot of his tests, and they do talk about how he's been invited to overseas to do lectures in Czechoslovakia and also in England later in the movie. But mainly, like I said, it's mainly based on family life, what a big, lovable family can be like. It's noisy, it's never peaceful and quiet, but sometimes when the house is too quiet, the dad gets lonely, which is really strange. I love a quiet house myself because that's what I'm used to, but I think a person can be used to noise, and when it's too quiet, they get disturbed. Such as during the scene where everybody gets a case of whooping cough and they're all confined to upstairs bedrooms, and the dad is so nervous because the downstairs is so quiet and peaceful, he just can't function, so he wants to go upstairs and be with all his kids. The movie is made up of what I would call vignettes, just, little 10 to 15 minute scenes kind of split into this sort of an 80 to 90 minute movie. Let's see. They have a little car called Foolish Carriage, which is really cute. The car's never reliable. It won't start half the time. And they have this vignette where the doctor decides everybody's tonsils have to come out just right after they get over their whooping cough. And in those days, that was a fad. Doctors wanted to take every kid's tonsils out. Every kid had to have their tonsils out. There was a rare case where a kid's tonsils looked healthy enough to where they left them in. But it was very rare. And it's hilarious how Martha, played by Patty Brady, the doctor mistakes her. He gets her and Ernestine mixed up. And he says that Martha's tonsils are just fine. She doesn't have to have the operation. And they put Ernestine on the table, and he goes, well, no, that's, the doctor says, well, I told you that Martha's tonsils are fine. And the father says, no, that's Ernestine, that's not Martha. Oh, he goes, oh, well, you have so many darn kids, how am I supposed to know who's who? Well, get Martha up here, whatever her name is, and this one's fine, but then Ernestine is already knocked out. So he goes, well, might as well take this one's tonsils out too. They'll have to come out sooner or later. So everybody gets their tonsils out, but the thing is, Patty O'Brady, who plays Martha, she spent the whole morning bragging to the other kids that she's been eating donuts and apple pie for breakfast and just rubbing all the other kids' faces in it, because they've been starving all morning waiting for their operations. They're scared enough as it is because they got to get their throat sliced open. And on top of that, there's this brat sister, bragging to them that she's been eating delicious donuts and sugar and pie and all kinds of stuff. So she had to go into her surgery with a belly full of stuff. An even dozen. Some lady stops by in some later vignette from the local Planned Parenthood. Now, this I can kind of let slide because these were in the days where Planned Parenthood, I think, was just getting started. And I can let it slide because the lady from Planned Parenthood acts very disgusted that this couple has so many kids. She didn't have to act so hateful about it. I was gonna, at first I was gonna say these people act like, breeding is such a great thing, but this is clear back in the early 20s, and it might not have been such a terrible, example to set. I mean, they had a lot of kids, but they seem to be raising really good kids and not raising a bunch of delinquent kids. They seem like good behaved, obedient kids. They're not like the Duggars where they're just being, it's a fad and they're on TV to make money and get attention and stuff like that. So, anyway, it's really weird how this lady comes and she's been told by people in the neighborhood that Mrs. Gilbreth would be delighted to join the neighborhood branch of the Planned Parenthood, the local branch, because she has a big house to hold meetings in and she would be really interested in the cause. And I think this lady, as soon as she sees all the kids that are in the house, she gets very, very mean-spirited, like she hates children, and I'm not for that. So I was on the side of the family in that case. The one thing I have to say that I may not have addressed in my IMDb review about this movie is that the character Tom Black is a douchebag. Tom Black is a guy that the oldest daughter, Anne, Jean Crane's character, develops a crush on practically as soon as she sees him. He's like your typical Disney prince, no personality, no anything redeeming about him. Actually, he's worse. He's worse than a Disney prince. Disney princes at least have something nice about them, maybe later on redeeming or heroic or quality about them. This guy is just a dick. I don't like him, and I just don't know. Back then in 2008, about 8 years ago when I first reviewed this, I just don't think I really loved this movie way back then. When I first saw it, I knew that this movie existed before I watched it, and when I first finally saw this, I liked it so much that I think I ignored this character, or I just tuned out his dialogue. But since then, I've seen the movie a few more times, and I've listened very carefully to his rationale about why Anne's father is so right in being overprotective of his daughters. Frank Gilbreth is notoriously very overprotective of his daughters. He sees the new trends coming up in the early 20s, the bobbed hair, the 19-teens bathing suits that used to make women wear the caps and the long stockings and the long dresses, petticoats to the ocean to go swimming in. I mean, it sounds utterly ridiculous, but when you see, if you ever look online and see the evolution of swimming suits for women, you'll understand what I'm talking about. In the 19-teens and early, like turn of the century swimwear for women, you'll see how utterly ridiculously conservative it is. It covers the whole woman's body. It's like, I swim in t-shirts and shorts because I don't like exposing my body for my reasons, not because my dad won't let me show my body off. But for decency reasons in those days, that's the way women's swimwear was. You don't have the moral police like you did back in those days. So Anne is very frustrated. She's growing up. She's approaching her senior year in high school by this point, and she is so sick of looking like she has this long hair, and she has these frumpy bathing suits on. Her little sister, her younger sister, Ernestine, has to wear the same kind of outfit on. All the other girls at the beach are wearing a little bit more daring. I mean, in those days that was considered daring. They still wore kind of like knee-high stockings, but their thighs were exposed a little bit. Their arms were exposed. They didn't have to wear silly hats, which is ridiculous. Swimming with a hat on. It's just, and then you see the dad's bathing suit, and you just want to laugh. I mean, he's wearing like a woman's tank, like one-piece bathing suit style. It's just stupid. It's really stupid. I mean, there's just such a double standard. That's the key word, I think, the double standards, that if women expose too much of their body, men are going to take advantage of them, maybe even force themselves upon them. And we should all know by now why women get raped. It's because it's done by men who hate women. It's done by men who are disturbed mentally about women, or are disturbed mentally, period, and need to compensate for some kind of defect within themselves. Not because of some woman bearing their arm or their thigh or their ankles or whatever. So this Tom Black douchebag, they first see him, he works for the ice wagon, and he's not really much more to look at than your generic pretty boy. And later on, he does this really douchey stuff at the senior prom. Anne gets a date with this nice little cheerleader guy named Joe. Now, at first he appears to be an obnoxious, noisy, loudmouth kid, Joe. But he comes inside and he meets Anne's parents, both of them. He meets Mom. He meets all the kids. He interacts with the kids. He's not snobby to them. And he's very friendly. And he's even friendly to her dad. Her dad insists, of course, on coming to the dance with them and chaperoning because he's so overprotective. So Anne grudgingly says, okay, Dad, come along. And they go to the dance together. As Anne is walking past Mr. Tom douchebag, right in front of his date, he says, well, that cookie, she better have a chaperone because she's looking fine tonight. Right in front of his date. I mean, he's just a dill hole. You know, he's just this unlikable douchebag. And so later on, he actually grabs Anne and just kind of commandeers her and steals her away from her date. And she asks, what about my date Joe? Oh, throw him back. He's too small of a fish anyway. Joe's a little bit short, and, you know, he's made fun of by the other kids, you know, because he's a cheerleader, and he's a little, you know, he's just not what you call a popular kid. He's not super on the, you know, the conventional good looks. He has a personality that whips Tom Black douchebag's ass, you know, 1,000,000 times over. But that doesn't matter. Personality doesn't matter. He's just, Tom Black is the guy that Anne doesn't need. She doesn't need Tom Black, because all of his dialogue from this point on tells you that this is not the guy for her. And yet she wants this guy. This is just about as maddening as any feminist could say about The Little Mermaid or Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty or any of the other Disney princess things. He tells Anne, I'm glad your dad's so overprotective of you, because he's right. I mean, guys will screw around with girls until they're ready to get settled down and get married, and then they want a girl they can respect. Whether or not this was the popular consensus back in the early 20s, this still pisses me off because I'm living today. And it just makes me a little bit, you know, it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It makes me want to bite somebody and give them rabies, you know, that kind of thing. It makes me want to go back in time and go to that prom and say, and just go up to Anne and this douchebag and say, hey, you know what, this guy's a douchebag. Go dance with your Joe that you went to the prom with. He asked you to the prom, and this guy's telling you to throw him back because he's not, you know, he's not worth your time, that he's worth your time. This guy isn't worth shit. He's a piece of shit. He's just a very unlikable character. He's probably a man whore. He snubbed his own date, and he forced you to snub your date, or he talked you into it anyway. This is when I start to dislike both Anne and, well, I've always hated Tom Black, but Anne starts to become an unlikable character. That is until she throws Tom Black temporarily by the wayside to go dance with her dad. And her dad has received a telegraph saying that he's been invited after a sort of a reject telegraph last summer while they were in Nantucket swimming. He got a telegraph tonight at the prom that he's going to go to Prague, Czechoslovakia, if I'm pronouncing that right, and to London, England, to go speak about his ideas about motion studies and stuff like that. So it ends nearly on a happy note. Another thing about the prom that I wanted to mention, there was a character at the prom that I loved dearly. Her name was Deborah Lancaster, I think. She was one of Lillian's very good high school friends. She's a red-headed Southern belle, and I don't know the actress that plays her, but I'll get it, and I'll put it in the video. She is the most beautiful little lady, red hair, green dress, red lipstick, just a almost Lucille Ball type. But she just is taken with Mr. Gilbreth, and she talks to him at length about his work, about motion studies, and how he's putting the whole thing on the map and revolutionizing stuff. And then she just wants to dance the night away with him practically, and then other girls at the prom start dancing with him. So this old fuddy-duddy that the daughter didn't want going to the prom with her because she figured he'd ruin everything, he turns out to be kind of the prom queen, so to speak. Well, after this happy scene, we turn to bleakness, or not bleakness so much, just sadness. I guess that the Mr. Gilbreth has a history of some heart ailments, and Mrs. Gilbreth, Myrna Loy's character, has always warned him, please take it easy, Frank. Please just go easy, Frank. Just don't get so excitable. Don't go into that cold water too deep. You know, the shock might irritate your heart. I don't know how things were in the 20s with treatments for heart problems. But just as he's leaving to go to these speaking engagements overseas, he collapses of a heart attack at the train station, and he passes away. And this is when young Jimmy Hunt, who plays one of the little boys, Bill, has his shining moment on screen that caused one of the actual Gilbreth family to leave the movie screening in tears. So yes, that was a spoiler, and I will, like I said, put spoilers in front of everything, that all the openings of my videos from now on. It's just an amazing movie in so many respects. It's a wonderful 20s period piece, and since it was made in the 50s, it's just a quality family film, except for those morals that don't sit well with me about women, especially spoken by the douchebag Tom Blake. I just hate the character. I hate him with a purple passion. And I didn't realize how badly I hated him until I re-screened this movie last night. What else can I say? After the death of Mr. Gilbreth, his wife Lillian carries on his work, and she wins multiple awards and, you know, makes her own place in American history. And so it's really a wonderful true story. It's not only a now versus then, I think, review, but based on a true story review, of course. So I don't remember what I gave it on the IMDb. I'll have to go back and look. But because of the morals about women, as outdated as they are, they're still there. This is an older movie, but still, it's just there, and it just irritates me. Whatever I gave this movie on the IMDb, I think that I would probably have to give this movie 8 out of 10 stars, because that thing with Tom Black talking about how men just fart around and screw around with women until they decide to settle down with that one woman they respect, it doesn't fly today. It's outdated, it's stupid, it's bullshit. It's been bullshit ever since back then. And for some reason, people bought into that kind of stuff back then. So, anyway, other than that, though, I think it's a good movie, and I probably would have to recommend it if you can just sort of tune the asshole out whenever his mouth moves. He's like any pretty boy. If his mouth's moving, you should probably just pretend he's just, you know, making kissing sounds with his lips instead of talking. That's all for now. Until next time.